Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Non-Duality and the Metacrisis event. We're so glad to see you all here and to have people joining from all over the world and watching on YouTube, hopefully, as well in the future. Just a couple announcements before we begin. If you have any questions during the event, especially practical questions, you can go to the chat and message Natasha. Natasha Teoli is our Zoom host, and she can help you with any issues you're having on Zoom. Also, if you have any questions for the speakers during the event, we won't be taking questions until the end, but you're welcome to ask your questions in the chat to myself or Natasha as well. And there may be time for Jonathan and for James to address it during the conversation. So I think that's it for announcements. I'll now hand it over to Jonathan and introduce him a little bit in case you are new to Jonathan and his work. So Jonathan is the founder of Purpose Guides Institute and was also the founder of Green Sangha as well. He's been a purpose guide, meditation teacher, and psychotherapist for the past 20 or more years, and is now training others to become purpose guides and also bringing especially this topic to the conversation about the Metacrisis in particular. So Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate your intro. Well, I just want to invite us all to take a deep breath and ground ourselves, bringing ourselves to this interesting topic of non-duality in the Metacrisis. I want to warmly welcome my colleague and friend, James Baraz, who I'm just delighted said yes to my invitation. James, he's come to PGI once before, back when it was called Integral Awakening Center, way back in the day when I lived in San Francisco. And he's the author of Awakening Joy, really fine book that I recommend. He has been a Vipassana he's been a meditation teacher since 1978 and started teaching retreats in 1982. And some of his teachers I count as near and dear teachers of mine as well. Joseph Goldstein is one of them. Ram Dass is another. Pundaji or Papaji, depending on how you pronounce it. He's a founder or co-founder of Spirit Rock. And he's just constantly busy awakening hearts to joy and wisdom. So thank you for coming. I'm really, really glad to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me. Really good to be here with you, Jonathan.
I think I'll just start with this little 2-minute story about how this all came to be. And I'll go back pretty far to 12 years old. So how is it that non-duality and the Metacrisis? Those weren't the terms I used back then. And as I recall, I was in the hallway of my junior high school. I guess I was coming back from the bathroom or something because there was no one in the hall. This is not a dream. This was just, and I just stopped and I started just contemplating my life. What am I called to in this lifetime? What am I going to do? And I had what I kind of regard to be like a vision, but it was what it was. Maybe it was an insight. And two things arose simultaneously. They weren't disconnected. They weren't even discrete. But one was this movement of love, and I wanted to be part of the healing of the world. Just that's what I wanted to do. And then the other part was, back then the term was ultimate truth. I might now call it enlightenment. Who knows? And what came to me was like, I have no earthly idea how to heal and repair the world. And so I've heard of this thing called enlightenment, and whatever it is, if I had that might enable me to be wise enough to be a part of that. So flash forward, to 2024. I'll leave out all the in-between stages. And I haven't grown much since I was 12. So the terms have gotten more sophisticated. So non-duality, sometimes it has a lot of layers, and we'll get into it, is a stand-in for wisdom, the knowledge of inseparability. And the metacrisis is another stand-in for the thorny, interrelated, difficult series of crises we face, and also what's beneath it at the level of human consciousness. So that's a sort of short, answer to why I've convened this meeting. And I want to ask you, James, you get so many different invitations across your desk. And when I wrote you and said, hey, you want to do something on non-duality in the metacrisis, how did that, where did that meet inside of you?
Well, as I said to you when I responded, I said, well, first of all, that I really respect what you've done and have sometimes attended some of your podcasts. I remember the one with Adyashanti and Rupert Spira and Jonathan Prendergast, and also one with Joanna Macy. So I've enjoyed your work, but that particular topic, non-duality and the metacrisis, as I said, those are pretty much the two main things that are on my mind much of the time, or most of the time, other than my relationships here and there. But in the bigger picture, those are the things that really speak to me. One, to have a deeper holding of reality in a way that's liberating, and wanting to share that with others, because it's been so profound for me to open to that perspective. And also the fact that we're faced with something that's never been here before, where it's kind of up to us to show up, with everyone who's been fortunate enough to receive teachings, to hold things in a different way, to meet this crisis, what you're calling the meta crisis, which is climate and all the other kinds of crises, with the wisdom and the love that I think is the healing energy. So I said, oh, these are the two main things on my mind. How could I refuse something like this, especially with you? So it didn't take me long to say, yeah, I'm in on this one.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and I'm glad you did say yes. Well, before we get into the nitty-gritty in just 2 minutes or so, would you lead us in just a brief little meditation?
Oh yeah, sure, happy to. How about if we all just arrive here in the moment? If you'd like, you can close your eyes or lower your gaze, and you're not externally distracted for just this brief time, and feel yourself on the earth. Feel the earth support you, our shared home. You might take a few deeper breaths and breathe in a calming energy, fill your whole being. And as you breathe out, relaxing, letting go of whatever you don't need. And as you sit here on this earth, just reflect on the fact that everything on this planet comes from the stuff on this earth. What we call nature, trees, vegetation, all living beings, animals, creatures up in the sky or below the ground or in the water, all part of nature. And we too are part of nature. We are nature. We are nature expressing itself uniquely as you. And just relax into that and enjoy the freedom that comes with knowing that you belong, you are nature, and letting it deeply, easily move through you, feeling life enjoying itself. I'll be quiet for a few moments now. Life expressing itself and knowing itself through you, as you. And may our time here together collectively move us to care for our shared home with wisdom and with love. Letting life guide us to support itself through us. So you can gently come out. Hi, just a quick hello, wave, so we know we're here. Hello. Okay. All yours, Jonathan.
So, what is the Metacrisis? And in one way, I regard this inquiry, this question, as a koan, meaning it won't resolve into a definitive, precise answer that we can hold on to for all time. Provisional definitions, for sure. I'll get to them in 60 seconds. But for big questions, in the Zen tradition, the koan tradition, they'll ask impossible questions. An impossible question. What is the sound of one hand clapping? What was your original face before your parents were born? These sorts of questions are designed to confound the mind and bring you to a deeper place where you become the answer. There's a revelation, and it's not even an answer as like an object, but that subject and object collapse. And to me, this question, what is the metacrisis, is such a question. And one of the building blocks is another term that I will define, polycrisis. So we know we have multiple crises. For instance, the ascendancy of AI, climate change, ecosystem collapse, thousands of nuclear weapons. The list goes on and on. They exist, though, not as absolutely discrete crises, but they interrelate to each other. So we know that the poverty crisis and the climate crisis affect one another. Poverty affects climate, and climate fuels poverty. And there are any number of these sorts of synergies. And this is why this term polycrisis was coined, to speak to the fact, like a chord, right? You can have in a C chord, you can have a C, an E, and a G, but they're not just three free floating notes, they form a chord. And so the chord of the multiple crises creates a polyphonic crisis, if you will. Which for some of us begs this question: why so many crises? I mean, maybe it's always been that way. What is unique and different at this time is that it's at a global scale. Even when, and civilizations in the end last generally 300, 400 years at most, when one collapses, that was a regional experience, not insignificant, but regional. We're a global civilization now. You know, this just at the level of supply chains and the food chain and so forth. So polycrisis is kind of a foundational concept for understanding the metacrisis. Multiple crises that interrelate and affect one another. But the polycrisis doesn't answer the question of the origin. And so now we come to the term metacrisis. So I'm going to put up a slide. And James, at any point, if I say something that doesn't resonate with you, I always feel that when two people are teaching, the people who are participants really benefit from getting different perspectives. So I won't feel like you're trying to, you know, overshadow me or anything. I would love you to challenge me at any point if I say something that feels a little off, okay?
Okay.
Great. And then I'm going to ask you a question about the metacrisis. So the metacrisis transcends, but includes the multiple crises that make up the polycrisis. And we could just simply say that the polycrisis is the overlapping and synergistic threats that our global civilization is experiencing. Now, to perceive the origin of the polycrisis isn't something we need to study or get a degree in. My understanding is that it's a shift in perspective. The metacrisis philosopher Jonathan Rouston, he uses the term a viewpoint shifting maneuver. This is one of his definitions of the meta crisis. like meditation. It's a way of feeling into, thinking into, it's a felt sense of the origins of the polycrisis. And so this viewpoint shifting maneuver reveals a dangerous distortion in human consciousness. And this distortion is a misperception of the separation that we experience being fundamentally or exclusively real. I'm pausing there because this is the crux.
If I could just put something in there, sometimes it can be confusing for people to try to grapple with the fact that separation is a distortion of reality. And I just want to put in a word for it is one aspect of reality. It's just not the whole picture or the bigger picture. But on a relative level, you are Jonathan, I'm James, everyone is a unique expression. So it's just it's an incomplete understanding of the bigger picture. Just thought I'd put that in case people are saying, well, what do you mean? I'm me. I've got my driver's license and ID. So
yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I was explaining this to my son the other day. He had about 30 seconds in him to listen to what non-duality is. And I said, well, duality means that I'm going to brush my teeth, but I'm not going to brush yours. He's 15, so I wouldn't do that. You're going to do your homework, but I'm not going to do it for you. That's duality. It's good. And I, James, I love you. I'm not going to pay your taxes and you're not going to pay mine. Oh, so that's duality. That question though is at a fundamental level, is that the only reality? Is that the primary reality or primordial reality? And non-duality says no. And so what can happen is we can assume, live as the understanding that separation, that individuality is the primary reality. And I'm under the impression that we've taken that notion about as far as we can go. And that to balance it, we also need to really examine this story of separation and upgrade it. We don't get rid of it. We still want to know whose taxes to pay and whose teeth to brush. But at the same time, there's a heart opening when we come to experience ourselves as living as part of, or as a modulation, as an emanation of, call it the mystery, the Tao, the living earth. There are two stories that I've identified, or that we've all identified maybe, that come from this story of separation. One tradition would have it that we humans were created to have dominion over an object called the earth and all its fecundity. Dominion over. So that's one story of separation over here. That would be more sort of the traditional story. Now you come up to modernity, and it kind of did away with that. And then it was like, well, no, actually, the world is a storehouse. It's a resource storehouse. You can go and you can just start taking all the trees and fish and anything you want, and so forth. Again, this idea that the earth is either something we can and should control, or something we can take like a safety deposit box and keep making withdrawals. These are two modulations of the story of separation. So I'll stop there. So that's the problem as I see it, and I want to hear from you, James, that the meta-crisis is founded in part on this notion or felt sense that separation is the most real or the only or primary reality.
Yeah, and I would agree that the creation story that at least most of us in the West, the Judeo-Christian creation story, has shaped much of our thinking. It's the bottom line conditioning that we've seen the world as, with one other unfortunate wrinkle in that story, which is that we blew it by eating of the tree of knowledge between good and evil, and our becoming aware of what's good and what is wholesome and what is unwholesome got us into a whole lot of trouble, and we were cast out of Eden. And perhaps we can be forgiven if we repent enough, because having that wisdom and that understanding was beyond what we should have had. And I think that's another unfortunate way to hold human understanding and wisdom and knowledge. So I'll just add that on to the complication of the mix.
Yeah. I just want to be transparent and say that I'm not looking to figure out precisely what metacrisis means. I like it as an open question, like the word mystery or Tao. Mm-hmm. The second I'm like, yeah, I know what the Tao is. Let me tell you. I'll tell you precisely what it is. It's like that for me.
Mm-hmm. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao.
Yes. And the metacrisis that can be spoken of is not the deepest, truest metacrisis. And yet, speaking about it, leaning into it together as a group can be really edifying, for sure. So I want to move now to sort of the second piece. So we talked about sort of the problem, the metacrisis. And now I want to talk about practice. So I will put up a slide. James, feel free to weigh in at any point. So for me, the metacrisis is an evolutionary invitation or a non-dual threshold.
I can't see your slide.
You can't see my slide? Oh,
no. Yeah.
Darn. Well, let me try that again. Thanks, Catherine. How about now?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
So the metacrisis is an evolutionary invitation. It's something we can awaken to now that we are a global civilization. And the non-dual teachings are, I think, absolutely essential. And I use the word threshold crossing because until we transcend, though include, the story of separation and pass through this threshold into at least partially a non-dual understanding, we will be stuck in the polycrisis, not understanding how we continue to create crisis after crisis after crisis. So to me, the metacrisis is itself inviting us on a journey. It is par excellence an invitation to a wedding to our future selves. And it may take years, decades, centuries, millennia, I don't know. But it's a journey that I feel I've been invited on. And I think we all are, in fact, being invited. Now, meta, as you probably know, simply means beyond, right? So there's physics and then there's metaphysics. Metaphysics is that which supposedly goes beyond physics. So we have our multiple crises, but what's beyond or between or underneath these multiple crises? So going beyond the experience of duality, going beyond the story of separation, is to move beyond our mistaken identity as primarily skin encapsulated egos. I don't know who coined that term, but I like it. So someone wonderful invented that. Yeah, we're skin encapsulated egos and so much more. So now here, this gets a little wonky. So try to stick with me here. I'm calling these lineages of non-duality. As a person who has been, meditating since I was a teenager, but also someone interested in nature-based mysticism, I've always wondered, well, how do these two relate? And what I've come to understand is that these are actually two lineages of non-duality. So one you could call the consciousness first model. This is classical non-dual meditation, right? Because in science, or at least some scientists will say that consciousness is an epiphenomena of the mind, of the brain, I should say. And this non-dual lineage turns it in reverse and says, no, consciousness is first. Some people will call it God if they use theological language. And all so-called materiality is an emanation or a modulation of that consciousness. And classical or traditional non-dual meditation, for instance, Zen in Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism, and there's many others, are examples of meditation paths that help us to experience this dimension, if you will. But there's a whole other spiritual non-dual lineage, if you will. And some people would say you're taking too much liberty with the term non-dual, but I'm willing to risk it. And here I would call it the earth first model. That the living earth, as opposed to consciousness, is considered the primordial or essential or fundamental reality. And that our practice is to allow the so-called ego, the separate self-sense, to soften and dissolve in the unitive intimacy experience with all of wild nature. And what does this do? I use this term non-dual responsibility, where we wake up to what is inside of us that wants to express itself as a gift of service and love to the world. And classical enlightenment sometimes attends to this, but sometimes doesn't. And there's a whole thing on that, which I won't go into. But I'll stop in a minute and by just saying one more thing about the soul level purpose piece. Let me stop this slide. It's not merely about knowing, having the personal felt sense of illumination, transcendence, enlightenment. This is beautiful. That experience of when the ego completely collapses and there's just awarenessing, lifing. Beautiful. And then there's this, so that's the being. And then there's this other element, which I use the word becoming. Well, then now how does love want to move? How did that woman put it? The mystical path with practical feet. Is that what she said, Angela Sarian? How do I want to love this one wild, precious life, as the poet Mary Oliver put it? And not from the place of ego, but from the place of soul, from the place of ego collapses and there's an automatic response to the world. And there are any number of places that need your help. But what's the one you're called to? All right, I'll stop there. So that's a little bit about practice. And James, I'm wondering if any of those threads particularly resonated with you, or if there's a few tweaks that you'd like to kind of offer. or additions or subtractions?
Well, first, you're putting terms in things in terms of non-duality. I bring my Buddhist practice to this, which at the heart is what the Buddha talked about, the seeing through the sense of separation, seeing through identification with self. And in those first two models, one of consciousness based, more in the Tibetan Vajrayana and some Thai forest traditions, where awareness is the ground of being, and awareness, which is empty, wakeful, and responsive. That's the nature of awareness. Say in Shapkar, who a great Tibetan master, wrote The Flight of the Garuda, awareness is intrinsically empty, naturally radiant, and ceaselessly responsive. That is inherent in awareness. So that's right there in Buddhist teachings. And the other side, the way I understand it, the word dharma means nature. And the Buddha really was pointing to this expression of body and mind is just nature expressing itself through its own particular pattern called human experience. So it is nature to start with, and it is just remembering or discovering who we really are in the first place. We are nature, and we are imbued. There is this awareness in certain Buddhist lineages that knows itself, which is pretty mysterious in itself. How does nature know itself? I love Brian Swim's saying that we are a star's way of knowing itself. And so it's both the consciousness that knows itself, but this embodied expression of nature following its own laws. So both of those, I think, are covered in the way I see things. And ultimately, I'm right with you as far as the mystery being the thing to surrender to, because how can our little human minds understand what we really are?
Beautiful. I'm so glad you're pointing out the waking up as wild nature element in the Dharma in Buddhism, because I think sometimes it either gets lost or people aren't sort of hearing it. I know in my Zen tradition, we meditated in a zendo, and it was a lot of indoor activity, frankly, which is fine. I benefited from it. But before Zen became Zen in Japan, in China, Chan Buddhism, its sort of progenitor, was very Taoist influence. And my understanding is that the proto-monks of Zen would meditate outdoors with the mountains and the rivers. And when they woke up as wild nature. It wasn't some sort of private experience, so to speak, an illumination of primarily an earthbound individual. But as you put it, Brian Swim, we're a star or a one leaf on the planet awakening to its true nature. Buddhism has this, doesn't it?
Has it? This is how the Buddha spent most of his life. He said, there are trees and roots of trees. Go find one and see who you really are. Understand the Dharma, which is the natural law. And the best way to do that is being in nature and seeing that you are a part of nature.
So one question before I invite you to a little interlude to the awakening joy piece. Is it your perception, and if so, how come? My perception is that sometimes in 2024 modern Buddhism, that this natural wild earth element gets a little de-emphasized to something called human meditation or some such thing. What do you think? Is this something more that came from the East and we've imported it?
I think it has been maybe an unfortunate I didn't get that. Whoops, I just hit Siri by mistake. And I'll say it one more time for you, Siri. That it's an unfortunate thing that we can be so focused on understanding the deepest truths in the stillness, in the silence, that that becomes a higher priority. And in fact, I'm looking at one of my teachers I showed you before, Punjaji or Papaji, and I went to him. This is what really got me back into joy, because I had lost my joy for a while. And I said, he would talk about emptiness all the time. It was his favorite word. But he had a different quality when he spoke about emptiness. And my final question after being there for 3 weeks, he said, give me all your questions, give me your questions. And I said, I have one more question, give me your question. And I said, when Buddhists or Buddhist teachers talk about emptiness, there's such a seriousness and a solemnity to the word. But you talk about emptiness, you're having a grand time. You're laughing and you're expressing, and it's so much more alive. Why is your emptiness so much more fun than Buddhist teachers? And he said to me, just what I'm saying to you now, he said something like, I'm paraphrasing him here, he said, if you touch a depth of understanding in that quiet stillness, it's easy to misconstrue and say, this is how you understand the deepest truth, and the activity of life becomes secondary, a kind of second place. But he says, that's your emptiness. Those are those Buddhist teachers. My emptiness includes joy and sorrow and love and pain and he says, nothing is rejected from my emptiness. And then he had this like almost this otherworldly laugh. Ha 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 ha. And it was a moment that stopped me and woke me up to seeing that I had been preferentially assigning the stillness, and somehow in my losing of my joy through, I won't get into that now, I had somehow lost my celebration of life. And then the understanding of nirvana and samsara are one, and all the beautiful lineages in Buddhism that talk about making love with the world and being the world broke that trance, and that's how I got back into joy. Just what you're pointing out now.
Yeah, I'm just taking that in. So, James, before I go to this third part, I just want to play devil's advocate and say, look, if here I am contemplating the meta-crisis, and my heart breaks on a daily basis. I see what's happening with Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Gaza and China and the Angars, and just closer to home, I walk on the street and sometimes I'll see people on I don't know what they're on, crystal meth or fentanyl and homelessness, and I'm just like, And so I want to be responsive and open, but also have that the possibility of joy that since I've taken it upon myself to be a metacrisis philosopher, can I do that and be joyful? Can we be activists and be joyful?
I firmly believe, and not only believe, it has been my koan for the last couple of decades, 15 years really, as far as between 15 and 20 years, as far as just what you're pointing out to me. Because I was teaching Awakening Joy. I started teaching that, or looking at the possibility of joy, after being around Punjaji, and then starting to write about joy in the around 2000, 2001. And so I was going about doing that and enjoying what I was teaching, and then I got it where we were headed, and the problem that was facing us. When I read Bill McKibben's book Earth with 2 A's in it. I had seen An Inconvenient Truth, which touched me deeply, but it was reading that book Earth that I put it down and I said, oh my goodness, this is not joyful. This is what's happening. And I was really depressed for a while and questioning what I was doing. And I had a very important exchange with someone who's become a dear friend and an inspiration of mine, a guy named Lou Leonard, who is the co-founder of One Earth Sangha that I'm very involved with. And at the time, he was the climate manager, program manager for World Wildlife Fund. And he was also a deep practitioner. And I said, Lou, I'm getting it. We need to address this. The world is going down. I don't know what I can do. All I've been doing is sharing the Dharma and teaching Awakening Joy. Like, big deal. And he looked at me and he said, James, joy might be one of the most important things we need to remember. This is the head of the climate program of World Wildlife Fund. He said, you just keep on teaching about joy. And it hit me and I said, oh, okay, I can do that. I will do that. And like I said, that's been my koan, because we care for what we love, and we love what lights us up and makes us come alive. Just like in Inconvenient Truth, near the end of that movie, after you're kind of blown away by the difficulty we're in, then you see how magnificent life is, and you're walking away saying, don't you love life? Don't you love this planet and all its glory? And that more and more has become what I want to bring to this conversation, along with many other voices, of getting in touch with how much you love life and how much it makes you come alive, and the gratitude you feel as a way to open to the difficulties. And that's been part of my real motivation for teaching Awakening Joy in these last years. So that's, maybe I'll stop here and I can carry on if you'd like some more.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear you saying is very resonant with me, perhaps in slightly different words, but maybe it's exactly what you said, is when we connect with our depths, the deep way we are meant to love into life, then yes, the problems of the world do break our heart. But at the same time, we love to love. We were meant or designed for loving. And that act of service, that act of self-transcendence and seeing the people or the more than human realm that we're serving, it does awaken joy. It's like I'm in the right place at the right time, doing my part. I can't carry the whole planet on my shoulders. That will crush me like a bug.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, when you see that, and this is kind of what I had mentioned early on, is that somehow we've been blessed, and people on this call have been blessed to be exposed to the medicine that can heal. One of my friends, another inspiring friend, Bob Doppelt, who does a lot of work on climate and with Congress and teaching resilience to communities. He said to me, that was the start of One Earth Sangha, when he said, I said, "Oh, Bob, it's so wonderful that your love of nature and your Dharma practices come together." And he said, "The Dharma holds the key." And then he shared with me this book that he wrote, non-jargony, non-Buddhist, to lay people, because that's who he communicates with. He's a college professor. Now he's very active around climate, about 5 Dharma principles that are required for the transformation of consciousness. And that's been my koan to share the Dharma, these principles, in a way that that makes it exciting to be engaged at this time. And the first principle is just what you are talking about. He puts it in these words. He says, "Understand the system that you are part of." That's it. That is this non-dual perspective, that you are nature, you are a part of nature. If you get that, that changes everything. And then he goes on to share other principles that when you understand, there's that shift of consciousness. And when that happens, not feeling the weight of, oh my goodness, this is such a long road to hoe, or God, where is this leading to? But it's exciting that we hold the key. And I'll just end this little piece with something that I have at my tagline in all of my emails from Terry Patton, our mutual friend. He says, "If the measure of a human life is a chance to have significance that extends beyond itself, then we've hit the jackpot. We are alive at game time on the planet when everything we value is genuinely threatened, when it's time for all hands on deck. So we are the stars of our own superhero movie collectively. And that's kind of exciting."
Amen. Before I move into that third section, a little story arose, which is, you're speaking to this experience of being truly a fundamentally part of wild nature. And on the one hand, it's a thought. Well, of course, I'm part of wild nature. I'm on the planet. I'm part of the biosphere. I'm breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide and so forth. So but you can still have a kind of separation. And so I heard this story the other day. There was a past student of mine who got married 2 days ago. And he actually met his wife-to-be on one of our programs. And before I say yes to someone, joining the program, I say, please take a soul walk. And by soul walk, I mean go out into the wilderness, or at least outside, and walk with the question, would taking this program be purposeful for me, but don't answer it with your brain. So he's telling this story at his wedding. And he says, he got very frustrated. He's like, and I would say things like, listen with your whole body, you know, the trees and the leaves and everything. And he's just like, I don't know how to do this. And then, and finally he said, he just quieted his mind. He was just like, I don't know how to do this. And he listened with an ear, a sensitivity, a receptivity that was just so much larger than the canvas that he would usually listen with. And then that became a way for him to discern his next step, whether it was who to marry or where to live and so forth. So it can be that simple, is just getting outside of the homeostasis of your everyday agitation and listening. Yeah, exactly.
All about this is you might know that image of Milarepa, the great yogi. He's always has his hand to his ear in the tankas, and he's listening for the song of the Dharma, the 100,000 songs of Milarepa, because it's right inside. If we can hear what the earth and what life is calling for us, how to show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to take 2 minutes to sort of finish up this little talk, and then we'll have James speak and then do some Q&A. So, you know, the first part I talked about what I regard to be as the problem, right? The origins of the metacrisis, being in part this story that we overly invest in, the story of separation. And then the practice. The practice can be classical meditation. It can be a wild intimacy, you know, with the earth and all of life, the more than human realm. And I think there's a possibility of a resolution, as a completion of this circuit. And the outcome, as I see it, is not just thinking, but an actual felt sense that we are truly kindred with the wild earth. We know we are kindred with our mother, our father, our brother, sister, cousins, maybe even tribally. We feel this sense of kindred, you know, intimacy. That is not only possible, but I would say it is as true and deeply needed to experience being kindred with wild earth. For we moderns and postmoderns who spend a lot of time, as I do, indoors on my computer, it can be a journey. It can take some effort to get out and practice, as it were, that Milarepa listening. And so to me, this is the awakening of a primordial ethics, right? Of course, I take care of my 15-year-old son, my wife, my elderly father. You know, I'm responsible to them. It's an ethics that's sort of, you know, almost inarguable. But a primordial ethics is when we realize our primordial nature, we become responsible. This is why I use the term non-dual responsibility. When you experience unitive intimacy with all of life and ask the question, what is my place in Indra's net, in the great hoop, the sacred hoop? Then it's not just a theoretical or a passive intimacy, it's an active one. It's an active intimacy. I don't just sit there radiating fatherness to my son. I buy the groceries, I fix the dinner, I serve the dinner, I check the homework, right? It's dynamic, unitive intimacy. So the last sentence here is not merely the absence of the story of separation, but then a longing for taking one's place. which is already there. It's not something that you have to manufacture at all. We naturally want to feel a sense of deep belonging, of efficacy. My teacher, Ajay Shanti, put it like this. He goes, I noticed that people do better with meaning in their life, right? He's a non-dual teacher, but as time went on, he's like, I think I've been de-emphasizing meaning making. So that I see as a kind of a resolution. And by resolution, I don't mean putting a period in it and it's done. The resolution is this endless activity of seeing, of feeling one's place and acting from that place as a gift of service and a demonstration of love.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Some comments. Yeah, I think the more one is in harmony with the deepest truth, the more there is a natural impulse to express out of love your understanding. Like I was saying before, that Shopkar quote, intrinsically empty, naturally radiant, and ceaselessly responsive, that is inherent in awakening. Or another quote I love from Shanti Deva, who is the Dalai Lama, wrote the Dalai Lama's Bible, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He says, the miracle of awakening lifts us above poverty into the wealth of giving to life. That's the natural expression of awakening. We're lifted above poverty, that smallness, that sense of separation, into the wealth of giving to life, where life is using us because it loves itself, one could say. And in that, to keep it inside is just, you're missing out on the real joy. And that's where also community is so incredibly essential for this, because if you feel, oh my God, it's how can I save the world? It's way too much, but it's how can I do my part, find out what my gifts are, and join with others and share those gifts, and it's a synergy that's very magnetizing. Andrew Harvey has a line I love. He says, follow your heartbreak. He says, go to where your heart is aching and express your caring, because that will relieve that heartbreak. As Angeles Arian says, action absorbs anxiety. And so you want to express it, otherwise it's too painful to keep it inside, but it's not your place to save the world. It's just your place to find out what the world is asking of you. That quote, I know I listened to you, I think recently, that Frederick Buechner quote. What is it? Why don't you share?
Find the place where your deepest gladness and the world's deep hunger meets.
That pretty much says it all. That's what joy is about. And where there is the power in joyful engagement. So that's what we're here for.
Would you be willing to take some questions, James?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let's have it. Let's hear from others instead of our own voices. Please.
So if anyone has a question for James, please raise your hand. Let's start with Stephen.
Or Justin, or Jonathan, I mean. Yeah. Hello.
Hi. I thank you both for reminding us of our intimate oneness with all there is. I've spent probably 2 decades teaching undergraduate college students to do what I call ecological thinking, to think like an ecosystem that includes understanding the systems we're in as well as affinity for non-human life. And it also is important for me to remind students that we're not just embedded in natural systems, but social and cultural and political systems. And so I'm thinking about what is enlightened citizenship? What is engaged civic enlightenment looking like? And it's probably, chop wood, carry water. But the ecological crisis is up for grabs in November.
Mm-hmm.
And it would dishonor those who sacrifice so much for this republic that we are benefiting from if we do not remember that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, which I think is a lovely term, for the greater good, which is one expression of unitive thinking. What is the greater good in terms of how we act as members of this political system, which is also part of the poly crisis?
Is it okay to jump in?
Please.
Well, I'm very glad you asked. And I think for me, I've been involved. I don't know if I forget if I had shared with you, Jonathan, maybe I have, but I've been very involved in the last months, reviving how I was involved 2 years ago and then 2 years before that. My main climate action is making sure people who have compassion and inclusivity as the people who will lead this world or who lead this country. So I've coupled, my wife and I coupled with this swing state expert from Wisconsin who's come out here and done, we put on 3 different big events recently, and we're going to be working hard as we did in 2020 because everything is on the line. And what happens in November, whatever the thing you care about, for me, this is my climate action, but if it's reproductive rights or Medicare or inclusivity on all levels or fairness, everything is on the line. So to put that care into a meaningful outlet, and for me, it's doing a lot of swing state actions that have seemed to make a big effect. And I'm happy to talk to anybody offline who wants to know more about that. But I want to avoid getting too much into, because I could go down that rabbit hole or that, easily. But anyone who wants to talk about it, I've rolled up my sleeves and I'm happy to share with anyone else who wants to do that with me. So
thank you for that work, James, and thank you for your sharing, Stephen. Let's go to Joseph, then Tammy.
Well, thank you for both of you. My question has to do with what needs to be let go of. And I think, Jonathan, when I first heard you, you were interviewing Ajay Shante, or he was interviewing you. And you mentioned the word, I think, awareness 2.0 or awareness 3.0, and that there was a transition needed, from the old version of non-duality. And James, it's been decades, but you and I sat in India, I think in '82, and it's like there's a very traditional Buddhist practice that you're rooted in. And so I don't know who else on the call is like that, but what in the traditional practices needs to be let go of?
Do you want to start first? I'm happy to go, but I want to give you.
Sure. I mean, I'll say something to that. for me, and I can't speak to what a tradition should or shouldn't do, but to me, this notion of dividing sacred and profane, the spiritual or religious and everything else, to have that really and finally collapse. So I guess it's really coming back to that. Well, I would actually put it more like this. What is the objective? What is the goal, right? And so I love the word freedom or transcendence and enlightenment. But then this really strange compound that I came up with, non-dual responsibility, it's clunky. It'll never catch on. But I appreciate it because it's like not responsible to life. That's that's more on the bodhisattva side of things. If that could be pushed a little more to the center and a little less of enlightenment as a self-improvement project. And there's nothing wrong with the I want to be a better, husband in 5 or 10 years. I'm not kicking it. I'm trained as a therapist and so forth, but a little less of that and a little more of the responsibility, the impassioned, awakened in joy and love responsibility. That would be my 2 cents if that's taking a swing at it. James?
Well, first, about this, your term non-dual responsibility, I wanted to interject the term that I use that's very close, but speaks to me even more is Julia Butterfly Hills, who's one of my heroes, her term, joyful responsibility, where it becomes an act not of sacrifice, but of joy to love the earth and to awaken that in others. So whatever your heartbreak leads you to. As far as what needs to be let go of, the things that come to my mind, and there's it's all about letting go. That's going from the second noble truth to the third noble truth. So this is a big one. But the things around around the Metacrisis, letting go of thinking we know where this is all going to lead. I mean, there's a pretty good idea that there's pretty intense suffering coming down the pike. But whether it is, and I recommend a book that Jonathan and I both appreciate called Choosing Earth by Dwayne Elgin, where he sees the different possibilities over the next 5 decades, 2 of which are pretty awful. Hunger Games kind of dystopia is one, AI-controlled influence, the Matrix, everybody living in the Matrix, or awakening of the species. And he says, he gives good reason why any one of those 3 are real possibilities. So to let go of thinking, I know we are just doomed, and see, I'm going to work as best I can to bring as much consciousness as I can, because I believe that sooner or later, everyone's going to wake up as the rising water in their attic says, whoa, maybe climate, there was something to this climate. Sooner or later, everyone's going to wake up, and I'm going to do what I can to make it on the sooner side, because it'll be less dukkha. So letting go of how I know it's going to be, letting go of attachments. And then there are other kinds of letting go, like of stuff. We're all going to need to learn to change from the disease of more. And what I can do within myself, and I've got to look at myself as well, to do that and remind everybody we're all in this together. And this is going to take, especially for the privileged, a dramatic shift in your comfortability, and to do that as a joyful responsibility, and to do it with others, because of there's the, not to feel that it's up to me, letting go of my personal pressure, but to feel the connection, letting go of that sense of separation and that resistance to moving out of my comfort zone and saying, okay, hello, neighbors, let's do this together. So those are the things that come to my mind.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Joseph. I'll piggyback on and say, letting go is, I absolutely agree with James, is the key. And in meditation, my attempt, and I'm not always successful, is letting go of two things, like really letting go of who or what I think I am. So I got a story going, I admit it. And then like really letting that go. And the second is letting go of how I regard or what I think the world is. And that can feel existentially a little, threatening. Like, wait a minute, I don't want to let go of that. And to let that go. And it's just all mystery. And then seeing where am I led from that point. So that's, letting go for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Let's go to Tammy. You are muted.
Okay, there. Thank you so much for this. I'll see if I can vocalize all that it's inspired in me. Jonathan, when you talk about the polycrisis, I saw you with your fingers, and it really got me thinking of the polycrisis and the metacrisis as the whole hand, and us as individuals as thinking that we're the puppets versus being the whole hand, the whole. And with that, thinking in terms of what my purpose is, I have a passion for patterns of transformation, and I'm also an artist. And so I'm working on how can I express that artistically. And I think of that as being coming from the silence, from the whole, as being the pattern that moves into the steps that move into material reality. And so with that, I'm really interested in the practical steps, James, that you were talking about, of the 5 Dharma principles. What was the name of that teacher, author?
His name is Bob Doppelt, Doppelt. And he wrote a book called From Me to We, particularly around those 5. He's written some other brilliant books, but I can just very quickly tell you that things that you, I'm sure, could resonate with. Seeing the system you're part of is the first. Understanding cause and effect. Pretty basic. Actions have consequences, only we haven't figured that one out for generations to come. Even the people in power haven't thought about what their grandchildren or great-grandchildren will be dealing with. But actions have consequences, basically karma. Third is sila, is living with integrity, and how good it feels to not cause harm and act for the good. Basic human understanding. Fourth is compassion and what he calls stewardship, just seeing, instead of man's dominion over, that we have a responsibility of taking care. And so that could be seen as compassionate action. And the fifth is intention. Know your destiny, determine your destiny. And as it's said in Buddhism, everything starts with the tip of one's motivation, and intention is the basis of all karma. And so if you vision the possibility and work towards that, you'll be on the right track. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's interesting. This program is reminding me of, I had a graduate program that I attended that was graduate integrative education with Montessori teachers out of New Zealand. And we actually had a dialogue with Brian Swim. It's interesting that you quoted him, but this program also in ways is reminding me of that program.
Right.
It's all overlapping. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thanks.
Well, we're coming up on time. I wonder, maybe I could make some announcements now, and then James, are you available to stay for an extra 10 minutes to take a few more questions?
I am. I see the next person is my old buddy I haven't seen in decades, Shams. So if
wonderful.
Around,
okay.
I'd love to say hi.
Great.
But I can stay on for a while. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, so let's sort of end officially on time, and then we'll have a little after party for anybody who wants to stay. You can stay for as little or all of it as you see fit. So I just want to point out a couple of things as we come to a close. We just really touched the surface of the metacrisis. The metacrisis includes so much more than what we were able to cover. Zach Stein talks about the metacrisis as an educational crisis. Daniel Schmarkterberger talks about the fact that in our culture, we are playing rivalrous games, win or lose, right? So if, either China or India or the United States, lowers their emissions, short term, right, the other countries get a gain because they're able to power their economies more cheaply. So there's so many more levels, to this than I didn't want to, attempt to review it all. So yeah, an educational crisis, a cultural crisis. So there are all these different elements. So if you're interested, those are a couple of people I recommend, actually. Daniel Schmarkterberger.
Schmachtenberger.
Schmachtenberger. Okay, yeah. I've been mispronouncing it all this time. Probably my favorite is Jonathan Rouston, R-O-W Rouston, S-T-O-N. He wrote a article called Tasting the Pickle. Tasting the Pickle. So that's pretty memorable. So you can take a look at that.
It's Jonathan Rowson.
Rowson. Okay, very good. Thank you for correcting me. So yeah, he's wonderful, brilliant. He was a chess grandmaster, and now he's a meta-crisis philosopher. I think might be one way to he has a group called Perspectiva. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And then, YouTube, there's just so many ways to educate yourself. What is the metacrisis? I'll be publishing a short 2-page piece, in a month, and then a longer 15-page article in the summer. So in terms of gatherings, I want to put a couple of things on your radar. One is coming up this Friday, and it's James Baraz he's calling it Connecting Mind, Heart, and Nature Retreat. It's an eco-dharma meditation retreat with himself and his wife, Jane Baraz. It begins this Friday. It's 3 days till June 2nd, and it's happening both in person in California and online. And so I've sent you a couple emails already. You'll get another one. It'll have the link. And, I invite you to check it out, even if you can only do the online version. I know it will be well worth your time.
Thank you.
What else?
That'll be Friday evening, and then Saturday and Sunday through lunchtime. It's a weekend retreat, silent retreat in this gorgeous place if you're in Northern California. But you can also do it online. I'd love to share it with you.
Yeah. 2 programs here at PGI. We have a monthly meditation. I call it Portals to Awakening. The last one before summer break is June 2nd. So there'll be an email sign up. It's by donation. You can come, for free if making a donation isn't possible. And then periodically, once a month for the next couple months, we have something called Introduction to Purpose Discovery, or Soul Level Purpose Discovery. And the next one's happening June 15th. And that one is about the very thing I was saying earlier. is the collapse of separation is also simultaneously the revelation of your kinship with life and knowing your place, what you are called to. Your Jung called it your unique myth, or Bill Plachton called it one's mythopoetic identity. So that little short 90-minute call is about that. And then in the fall, we have our flagship program here at PGI called the Purpose Discovery Program. And I'll speak to that a little bit more in the overview. Anything you want to say to feel complete, James? It's been an absolute delight just conversing with you on these topics.
Same here. Thank you for inviting me and bringing us all together and doing the work that you're doing. And I would say let's get in touch with our joyful responsibility to share how fortunate we have been to receive teachings, and as Bellevue Rooks, another inspiration, says, this is the moment we were born for. So let's all hold that as this precious opportunity. And thanks for inviting me, Jonathan. Good to be with you.
Yeah, and thanks for receiving the invitation.